All right, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So we're into council's spring session. What are your major goals between now and the end of this session?
Sure. Well, I can't believe we are in the spring of 2023 already. But as we head into this new legislative session, my goals are to really focus on and build upon some of the issues that I have been most passionate about over the last several years, but particularly some of the issues that I've been working on and trying to get them finalized this term, recognizing that once you introduce legislation in a term, it has to be finished and completed by the end of that term, which for us will be December of 2023. So I'll be focusing on some of those issues that I really care about, which is really improving quality of life issues and public safety in all of our neighborhoods across the city of Philadelphia, working to connect Philadelphians to families, supporting and sustaining career opportunities, not just jobs, and continuing to take a whole government approach to addressing climate change and environmental justice, and working on, sort of finalizing and seeing to the end of the road some of our legislation that has transparency and accountability in government. So one thing I want to talk about and mention, because this will be some of the legislation that I introduced, is last week I had the opportunity to join Council President Clark in his district, Superintendent Watlington, Ryan Boyer, who is the business manager for Labor's District Council, but also for the entire building trades. And they announced the new construction trades program for seniors at Strawberry Mansion High School. And, this is one issue that I've really been focused on. I'm introducing legislation in February around career and technical education, but also around the development of a career and technical education high school in the city of Philadelphia, which is one of the long-term goals that I have for us to really reestablish CTE programming and a whole school that simply focuses on CTE education and connecting young people to those career opportunities. The other thing that we'll be doing in the next week or two is unveiling the 2023 version of our apprenticeship guidebook, which showcases all the available apprenticeship programs and opportunities in the city of Philadelphia. And it has all of the contact information where you can go to apply, when, how much you would get paid, what skills you need, whether they're soft skills or learned skills in order to be successful, and how much you would make when you get to the end of the road. And why is that important to me? Because we just passed legislation that will give a point preference to all CTE students that graduate and apply for a civil service job with the city of Philadelphia. And we recognize that we have a dearth of employees right now. We have a number of city employees who are eligible or will be eligible for retirement over the next couple of years. And so we're seeking to do all we can to get as many young people in that pipeline as well. And so I'll be focusing on those education issues, quality of life issues in our neighborhoods and in our communities, focusing on climate change and environmental justice as chair of Council's Committee on the Environment, and being sure that we continue to increase transparency and accountability in government. One last piece of legislation that I want to mention that's been a real heavy focus for me over the last couple of months, and we've actually had a study done to help us kind of work through this legislation, but it's to pass legislation that would improve our city's rainy day fund. And why is that important? Because while we have a surplus in our city budget that we know has been augmented by the federal government, now is the time for us to make preparation for any future economic downturn in the city. If anything should happen, we should always be fully prepared so that we can continue to provide good quality service to our residents. And so we'll be having a hearing on that legislation in the next couple of weeks to change the way our rainy day fund is set up and to change the contributions to that fund. Lastly, I just want to mention two other things around our drug paraphernalia legislation that we're continuing to work on to address some of the nuisance businesses that have really been plaguing our communities. We've seen a proliferation of these businesses since the pandemic. And so we're going to continue to work on ensuring that that legislation is being properly implemented And then finally, we're working with the Department of Human Services and PPD on the establishment of the last two community evening resource centers, formerly known as curfew centers, so that we have one center in every police division in the city of Philadelphia. And so the RFP just came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we know with that, by this summer, we'll have 6 community evening resource centers up and running across the city of Philadelphia. The latest RFP was for the East Division, which is the 24th, the 25th, and the 26th Police Division, and the Northeast Division. And I'll get those numbers for you for those divisions. But we'll have coverage in every single neighborhood in the city of Philadelphia by summer of 2023. And that was really, really important to me.
All right. So a lot of things going on, a lot of things specifically around children and youth.
Yeah.
I'd like to shift a little bit. We're about to enter budget season in about a month or so. And one of the questions I've been asking council members, how do you manage all that information you get about the budget? When the books are printed, they're probably about 3 feet high, and there's usually multiple volumes of them. How do you take all that information? Do you just look at certain things? Do you try to get through as much as you can? How does that work for you?
So I will say I am so thankful and grateful for the experience of being a legislative aide in City Council. I was a legislative aide for 5 years. And so what I do with the budget and what I've historically done, and this is sort of how I was trained to do it, and I've augmented obviously through COVID because we didn't get the budget books during COVID. And all the information is available online as well through the finance department. But what I try to do is I try to break it down department by department. And I literally will take the section of the budget binder for that specific department, and I will read, and I know it sounds like really boring, but I will read every single page of that department, one, to see how and what the breakdown is of class 100, 200, and that's all the different classes of how we pay personnel as 100. Materials, supplies, and services, contracting opportunities, all of that is broken down by different class. And so I look at each one of those classes, but I don't just look at the information they give us for that year. I go back 3 to 5 years and make a comparison of how it's changed over time. I'll go back and reread the transcript from the testimony from the hearing of the last year or 2, maybe 3 now because of COVID. And I really put all of that together in sort of building out a framework of what questions I may or may not have, and or what specific changes I'll request for that particular department. Particularly because I think, and this is one area that I love to focus on, is around zero-based budgeting. We do have some departments that have participated in a participatory budget process. But I do think it'll be advantageous at some point to shift many of our city departments to a zero-based budgeting formula, which would require you to start from zero every single year and then build upon what the needs will be and the needs of the residents will be for that year. Instead of just starting with, okay, this is where we were last year, let's kind of, figure out where we need to be this year based off of what happened last year. Because if we know that something's not working for our residents, or if we need to increase service in a certain area, we should say, all right, well, we've heard based on feedback and or data that most residents are concerned about X, Y, and Z. So maybe for this department, we should figure out how we can sort of get to that particular goal and utilizing zero-based budgeting to do that. So what I try to do in the budget process is go through every single department in that way. Look at years past, look at where we are now, read every single line so that, because some things will stand out to you and you'll say, that doesn't quite make sense. And so those items, then I'll, put a tab in, or I'll fold that page so I know to come back to that page. So that's what I try to do in the process. It is very tedious. I remember being in LA, and even now in council, I take the budget binder books home with me, because it's not enough time to read all of that information during the week. So literally during budget season, on the weekends and in the evenings, sometimes I take the books out and sit on the porch and do it, because there's just so much information to go through. So that's how I kind of try to look at this process and be very methodical and strategic and looking at everything and not taking anything for granted, because it could be one thing that you don't look at that may be exceedingly important. And I never want to be in that space and place. So that's how I approach the process. But I think overall, it's important for my colleagues and I in council to ensure that we are working to pass a budget that really prioritizes the needs of our communities, and that's all neighborhoods across the city of Philadelphia, really hone in and focus in on some of the more significant quality of life issues that we know are facing our communities, and ensure that we're fully funding real important priorities that make a difference for our neighborhoods and for our children. And so that will be the goal. And obviously we all have little areas that we focus on in the budget process. So, I'll definitely be focusing on workforce development, arts and culture, climate change, also focusing on the Office of Supportive Housing and how families are interfacing with the system at first point of contact. That's important to me as well, because we've received a couple constituent cases like that over the year. And so just really trying to get in as much as we can through this process and be sure that we ultimately pass a timely budget at the end of this term, and that we can send it to the PICA board.
Right. Now, the city has an unprecedented budget surplus right now from higher than expected tax receipts and the federal government COVID relief funds. How would you like to see that money used in this budget, and how much of it, if you have an idea, and that's a hard question to answer right now, but do you think now is a good time to be using a lot of that money? Should we be more careful about it? What do you think about that?
Well, as I stated, I have rainy day legislation that will ensure that we put, funds away to adequately prepare the city for any potential economic downturn. And we do that so that we can keep our credit rating high, so that we can continue to have a great borrowing ability to do all of our different projects, what we call capital projects, which are like brick and mortar projects across the city to upgrade our city facilities. I do think it's a good time to ensure that we are properly resourcing as many quality of life issues and some things that we are always not typically able to fund because we just don't have enough surplus. But I also think we really have to be mindful that in the out years of our city budget, like 3, 4, 5 years down the line, that we anticipate we won't have as much revenue as we have right now. And so I think we do have to be thoughtful in this process and not go on a spending spree simply because we have a large surplus, but be thoughtful about how we are preserving and preparing for the future, but also giving our residents good quality service now. And so we won't have the same federal infusion that we had at the beginning of this Biden administration again for quite some time. So we're not going to be able to depend on a federal surplus of money coming in like we have right now between all these different packages from, the infrastructure investment package and everything else that has happened since COVID. So I think we just have to be mindful of that as we move forward and ensure that we pass a budget that is thoughtful, prepares us for the future, but helps our residents now.
All right, I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia.
Yes, thanks, Larry, and thank you, council member, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Denise.
You were talking a little bit about how we need to be mindful in terms of the city budget and what we're spending money on. Over the last couple of years, one of the things that we've increased spending on is gun violence programs. And we're finding out now that maybe that money isn't being put to its best use. Has council talked about what it's going to kind of demand of the administration to get this straightened out?
And so like thank you for that question, Denise. And like you and many other folks, we all are receiving this information, much to our dismay, about how some of this revenue has been utilized. And I think it is incumbent upon us as stewards of our taxpayer dollars to ensure that we are looking through all of what has taken place over the last several years with the fine-tooth comb. because we certainly do not want to be in a space and place where, from a council perspective, we allocate the dollars, and then it's up to the administration to utilize the dollars in the way that we have intended. And we certainly don't want to be in a space and place where any of those funds, any of those dollars are mismanaged. So I know that that will be a central part of some of the sort of investigatory work that we do throughout the budget process over the next several months. In addition to that, I do think it's important, though, that we should not lose sight of the fact that we do need to continue to focus on gun violence prevention and intervention in the city of Philadelphia. We do still need to do that work. We just have to make sure that when it happens and when we are properly resourcing that work, that work is monitored and that we are checking on the data to see what the outcomes have been. And so because that all has just happened over the last year or two, I anticipate and look forward to receiving additional information from the administration since they administer those programs on the effectiveness of those programs. And I think that will help us to make better, more informed decisions as a part of this budget process.
Now, part of that whole program was supposed to include having people that can help these organizations best utilize this money, scale up programs that are successful, that kind of thing. Are you kind of disappointed that that's not what's been happening here?
Well, from the few cases, and I would say the couple cases that I've seen thus far, obviously, we never want to hear that any of those dollars were misused or mismanaged in any way. Because we do want to ensure that we can provide technical assistance to organizations that do need the opportunity to scale up and really improve upon and expand their programming options and availability across the city. So I don't want anyone to think that, everyone is just going to throw up their hands, because we're not. We're going to ensure that we are looking at all of this with a fine-tooth comb and ensuring that the residents that need the support around gun violence prevention and intervention do receive that support.
Now, whether we like it or not, this is an election year. You can't get around it as much as you would like to.
Yeah.
But particularly with city council at large races, and this is what's always fascinated me about them, you have 8 million people, in some cases literally, running for a set amount of seats. How did you manage to get through that traffic when you ran the first time? And as you look at re-election, do you see yourself having to change your strategy?
Well, that's a great question. One thing I will say is that last time I did not know that I would be running initially. And so we really only have 14 weeks to really run the best campaign that we could to get our message out to as many Philadelphians as possible. And obviously, as in the last race, I think it was about 32 people when it was all said and done. And even now we see sort of that same amount of folks who are wanting to run for 5 seats. And I think it's incumbent upon everyone that's interested in doing this work to, one, understand the importance of this work. We cannot take any of this lightly. I do think in this moment, with all the recent transition we've had in council, that it is important to have members of council who understand how to navigate city government to make it work for people where it's not working, to make it work for folks, and the parts that do work to navigate that part to ensure that our residents are getting the best quality of service. But again, times have changed since 2019. When we were inaugurated in January of 2020, who knew that 2 months after being inaugurated that we would be faced with a pandemic and then civil unrest and everything that has taken place since January of 2020. And so obviously, if you are planning to run the same campaign of 2019, I don't think that's a very wise decision. And so my team and I are certainly looking at all of that, all of the state legislative changes that have impacted the election process here in the city of Philadelphia and across the Commonwealth. And we are taking all of that into consideration as we move ahead with being able to run the most robust campaign possible to ensure that Philadelphians know and understand our message and the work that we want to do and continue to do in City Council. So for me, I'm not taking anything for granted. That means not one person, not one vote, not one place. I am taking nothing for granted. And I intend to work especially hard now until May 16 to get the job done. And so that's the goal. And that has always been the goal. And it will be difficult because obviously last time I was not working and I was solely running. This time, we have to carry out the business of the people of the city of Philadelphia and continue to run and do everything necessary to be successful. And I intend to do just that. And if I don't sleep again until May or June, that's all right.
Now, when you ran for election the first time, and I'm not sure if this was exactly your slogan, but you were basically moms get the job done. If there's a mom that's out there that wants to run for council, any advice?
Sure. I've learned a lot since being in elected public office. And one thing I've learned is that this work is not easy. It is 24 hours a day. It is 7 days a week. It never stops. And I love it. But you do have to be cognizant of that when you have children, and particularly when you have small children. And so what I try to do is ensure that I'm building in time for them. And so I pick them up every day from school, every single day. And if there are days that I may have to miss, then my husband or my sister will pick them up. But I try to leave some continuity in their lives, particularly because they're so young. And then I try to spend time with them, and or now, because my kids are getting just a little bit older than they were in 2019, I do take them out when I can, when appropriate. Not very often, but I do try to incorporate them in the work that I do and in the process. I will also say that you have to be kind to yourself and take a moment for yourself when you can. And one thing I did learn last time that I'm trying to incorporate this time is, instead of ordering out a lot of food because I'm not home, I do try to plan and meal prep a little better this time, so my kids are eating more vegetables this election season than they did in 2019. And that was one thing that I joked about with one of the other moms, Erin Santamore, on the trail last time. And she said, our kids will eat vegetables again. And I don't know why that stuck with me from 2019, because I was so, I think one night I was just upset that I didn't get a chance to cook before I left, and I had to order pizza again. And I was like, oh, that's so terrible. But I would say be sure that you're making time to meal prep and, have everything together for your children at home. And really just, again, be kind to yourself and know that not every day you're going to be at 120%, but you just get up and give it all you have and do it again the very next day. And one thing I will say that I'm very encouraged about is that I'm seeing more women who are running for office highlight the fact that they are moms. And that was something that was a little faux pas when I kind of first entered into the political scene. It was like something you knew, but you didn't really talk about. But now I'm seeing more women highlight the fact that they are moms, because we know as moms that we are super women. We do as much as we can to get the job done, both at work, at home, and in all facets of our life. And I'm just glad that that's something that stuck and is going to continue to stick, because that's who I am. I'm a mommy first.
Okay, thank you for giving us the time. And I'm going to send you back to Larry McGlynn, my co-host, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5.
Thank you, Denise. Councilmember, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for your work.
All right.